Welcome back to another episode of Learning to Cook on a Budget with yours truly. Today, it's all about how to pan sear. In this case, we're doing pork chops, but I'm gonna break down how to pan sear steak as well. I have a really simple marinade for you. Of course, you could just use salt and pepper, maybe finish it with a little butter. That's what I would do if I was doing steak. This marinade also works really well for steak, but I'm also teaching you how to do this with pork chops. There are a couple key things you need to know to get this perfect bite of pork chop from pan searing. Before we can pan sear these pork chops, we need to whisk up a quick and easy marinade with ingredients you probably already have in your fridge. So let's get to it. We are gonna start with Worcestershire. I do have the recipe on the blog if you wanna save it, print it, pin it out. You can do that there. We also have a little bit of oil. I'm gonna add a touch of sweetness with some brown sugar. A little garlic. This is just minced garlic with a little bit of that juices. I always go a little heavy on the garlic, but you know. And then 2 teaspoons of pepper, because this is peppered pork chops. So we're adding all that in there. We're gonna try not to sneeze, as pepper can make you do. I am using my flisk to whisk this up. A flisk is a whisk that also rotates into a sauce whisk and a flat whisk. So you can turn the little knob and the whisk gets flatter. Also makes it really easy for storing it in a drawer. It'll store flat. Before we pour this marinade on top, I am gonna add just a touch of salt directly onto the pork chops that are right here. Add to the other side. Okay, and now that we have done that, I'm gonna get these all snug in here so all this sauce can just right on top. It's nice to have the right size dish for your marinade, and we're going to scrape this and pour this right on top, and you're about to see that pepper all over these pork chops. I'm actually gonna turn this into a flat whisk because it's a little easier to scrape as a flat whisk. How handy is that? All right, this guy needs a little more love, a little more marinade love. Okay, with this marinade, you do want to make sure that it gets on the bottom. So I'm just going to lift up each pork chop a little bit so that bottom side gets a little love. You want to let this marinade sit as long as possible. This is a gorgeous marinade for steak as well. A thin sliced steak, it's so delicious. I love just a good simple salt and pepper on a steak, but also a little extra pop of flavor from the Worcestershire and garlic is also fabulous. So I'm gonna cover this and put it in the fridge at least for 30 minutes to give these pork chops time to soak in these delicious flavors. Pork chops have been marinating, and it is time to get them going on the skillet. I'm gonna break down 2 ways to do that. In this case, we do have this marinade. If you were going to pan sear either a steak or a pork chop that doesn't have any marinade, you're gonna wanna pat that dry to remove any extra liquid. In this case, this is gonna be a little bit saucier. We're gonna pan sear and then add the rest of this marinade in with them. So I'm just gonna kind of shake the pork chops off just a little bit before we pan sear them. The first thing we need to do, I do have about 2 tablespoons of oil in this stainless steel skillet. Stainless is my go-to for pan searing. It's gonna hold the heat well, it's gonna distribute the heat well, and it's also gonna help us get that real nice crust that we are looking for on both sides of these pork chops, or if you're cooking steaks in that case. We're gonna heat this oil up to its smoke point. It takes maybe a minute, minute and a half for that to happen. The smoke point is where you'll start to see the smoke, but just before that, you'll smell it, and that'll be your first clue to have everything. I mean, we already have it ready to go, but if you don't have it ready to go, it's gonna be time to transfer your pork chops or your steaks right into your skillet to get that perfect pan sear. I can smell the oil, which means it's about time to go. So I am, like I mentioned, gonna just shake a little off. I don't want it to be too wet. I do want the pepper and the garlic like seared in there, which is why we're not like completely. I should be able to fit all 5 of these here. We do want to give a little bit of space, just like with the braising of the beef. so we have our pork chops searing. We're not gonna move them. This is a trick with pan searing, is you wanna let them cook over that medium high to high heat for 2 to 3 minutes before you go to flip them and cook on the other side. So just let them sit. If you start to see, like in this case we have the marinade, if anything starts to really burn, we will adjust the heat down slightly, but you do want to keep it on that higher heat to get that shock and crust layer forming on this side of the pork chops. About time to flip over our pork chops over to the other side. We have two amazing flippers, the flip and the chopula. Both fantastic, both great. Use them both in my kitchen differently. I'm gonna use the chopula for this one. We are going to, I am gonna reduce the heat. I do see a little more darker spots in here, so I'm gonna reduce the heat down closer to medium, and I'm gonna start in the middle and flip this over. It's got a gorgeous crust. I can start to see the edges are already starting to cook through, which is a good sign. Again, flip and make sure they have a little bit of space. So we've flipped these guys. We're gonna let them sit another 2 to 3 minutes before moving them and letting that heat distribute all the way through the pork chop. And then I'm going to pour the rest of this marinade over the top just for a little extra flavor. And of course, this did have raw meat in it, so you need to make sure that you cook this marinade all the way through. It'll make for a beautiful sauce that is going to help finish cooking off these pork chops. Here's where you need your meat thermometer to make sure that you don't overcook these. If you want your pork chops cooked to medium, you're gonna wanna do an internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and you'll see that here on your meat thermometer. And I usually use the largest of the pork chops right into the thickest center part of the pork chop. If you want it cooked to well done, then you're gonna wanna wait for the temperature to reach 155 Fahrenheit in order to get that well done. And then we will transfer them from our skillet onto the plate and cover them with foil and let them rest for about 5 minutes. Letting the pork chops rest for a couple minutes before serving will allow the cooking process to finish and allow the juices to continue to flavorize your pork chops. It's time to take these guys off. They have this beautiful browned sauce from that marinade. Cannot wait to enjoy these. I am gonna set them over here on this plate, and I'm gonna cover it with foil to keep that heat in there. Definitely don't forget to turn off your stovetop. And again, this is gonna allow this pork, excuse me, a little bit more. If you were pan searing steaks, I would do that the same way. 3 to 4 minutes on each side until they reach the temperature that you wish. The meat temperatures are a little bit different than the pork temperature, so make sure to reference that anywhere between 120 and 155, depending on how well done you want that beef. And then I would do the same thing where you let it rest, give those muscle fibers of that beef a little bit of time to relax, just like we're doing with the pork after a pan sear. If you are pan searing a thicker chop or a thicker piece of steak, after you sear both sides for 3 to 4 minutes, it's probably not going to be cooked all the way through to a sufficient temperature. So then you can add it to a baking sheet. I usually use a rack. It's like a racked baking sheet, just like you would a beef roast, and then transfer that into the oven and cook for, depending on how thick the pork chop is, cook until it is either 145 or 155 for the pork chop, or 120 to 155 for the meat, depending on how well done you want the meat or the pork. And then you can, again, take it out of the oven, let it rest before serving. Okay, it's time. I want to have a little bite of these pork chops. These are peppered pork chops. The recipe is on the blog. That link should be in the description below. Pork chops especially, I feel like they have a reputation. They're easy to overcook. They're easy to dry out. That's what I love about pan searing for just a couple of minutes on each side. Pork chops or steak, it's really all about the marinade or salt and pepper if you're just going simple. Getting that skillet and the oil in the skillet's screaming hot, getting that good crust browned layer to both sides. And again, if you need to finish cooking it in the oven, you can do that depending on how thick the steak or the pork chop is. If you have that extra marinade, pour it in after you've seared both sides and let it cook all the way through. And then you have this beautiful pork chop that only took a couple minutes to prep. Serve this with easy side dishes, rice, mashed potatoes, some steamed veggies, side salad, whatever your favorites are, and you have yourself a really simple and affordable weeknight dinner. We have really fantastic cooking lessons and learning how to cook on a budget videos here on the YouTube channel. Please go watch some of those that you might find here on the playlist. And of course, please subscribe to get notified when we release new episodes, which is usually on Wednesdays at noon Central Time. I will see you in the next video.